Hey Mustang folks, thanks for joining me today. We are going to do something that I have been putting off doing for about 15 years, and that is installing this hood scoop from a 1982 Mustang GT on my 1987 LX. So I don't really know why I've put this off for so long. As I said, I bought the scoop quite a long time ago. I've had it sitting in my garage. I've seen it on a number of cars over the years, most noticeably on Harris Lou's car here. This is an absolutely gorgeous car. And I've always loved the look, but I've just never taken the time to mark out the holes in the hood and drill the holes. So today, that's exactly what we're gonna do. So before we get started, I'm gonna share with you a couple of measurements that I've taken on this 1982 Mustang GT hood scoop. The distance between this stud and this stud at the back of the scoop is 20 inches. And the distance between this stud and this stud at the front of the scoop is 22 and 15/16 inches. By finding the center line of your hood and the center of the scoop, you can then measure out from the edges of your hood to find exactly where it should be located from left to right. I do have some measurements that I'll share with you on where to locate it from the front to the back of the hood, but we'll talk about that a little bit more. Once you have those exterior bolt holes measured, then you can extrapolate where this one, the center hole at the back, goes and the center bolt at the front goes. Now I cut this off because my long-term goal was to make this a functional hood scoop, which we'll talk about in a second. Now I'm going to take and show you a picture of the hood with all of my locating measurements marked out on it. All right, so I've marked out my whole hood with masking tape and Sharpie so that you can find out where all of these things are going to go. So let's start with these two corner holes at the back. They are both 5 inches from the back of the hood and 14.5 inches from the edge of the hood. Now, one thing with these, when you measure them, you know your tape measure is about 1 inch wide. So you want to make sure that you're always measuring towards the center of the hood. So take your measurement from here, from the edges first to find your 14.5. And then make sure your tape measure is towards the inside of that measurement when you're making the 5-inch measurement. The reason for that is because the back of the hood actually has a curve to it. And so your measurements will be off based on that curve if you put that tape in the wrong part of the back of the hood. I hope that makes sense. For the front holes on the hood, they are also both the same, and I measured down 20 3/4 inches from the back of the hood and 13 1/8 inch from the edge of the hood. When you put the hood on your hood scoop, you'll know that it's centered because the measurement from the edge of the hood to the very pointy end at the tip of the hood scoop should be 12 3/4 inches. One of the things that we are going to need to do before we drill these holes is make sure that we center them really well. So I've got a center punch here, and we're going to line that up on our mark, and then we're just going to whap it with a hammer. You don't want to go too hard because you don't want to dent the whole hood in, but at the same time, you want to make sure that there's a mark there so that when you put your drill bit on it, that you get a good centering of it so that the hole is actually drilled where you expect it to go. Now, one other thing that you're going to want to make sure that you do before you try and drill a hole in your hood is have the right drill bit. I recently learned that if you take a standard drill bit like this and try and drill through thin gauge sheet metal, that your hole often ends up looking more like a triangle than a circle. And I found a great video on a YouTube channel called AVE that explains why that is. The trick to get a perfectly round hole is to use a step drill bit like this. You can find these relatively inexpensively now. And while I'm told that the original hole in the 82 GT hood was a 3/8 of an inch, I am drilling this out to 0.240 inches or 240 thousandths. All right, so we've talked about how to measure the bolt holes from left to right, and I've shown you how to drill the holes, but we sort of skipped over where you put it from front to back on the hood. So I reached out to some people on some forums, and I actually found a post on mustanggt.org. The post was from user KS82GT, and here's what he shared on from his 82 Mustang GT. These holes here that I located at 5 inches were 5 3/4 of an inch from the back of the hood on his 82 Mustang GT. So that might lead you to ask the question, why is it that I put mine back 3/4 of an inch from there? And the reason is because my intention had been to eventually convert this to be a functional hood scoop. Not so much because I thought I was going to get this huge ram air effect out of it, but because the engine in this vehicle is a little bit taller than stock, and I've actually got a bump right here on my hood where the carb stud is kind of hit it. I had to change from a standard sort of wing nut on my air cleaner to just using a long threaded screw to hold the air cleaner in place because it was just up a little bit close and tight to the hood. One of the other things that I found that was really interesting is that the engine, or at least the carb stud, wasn't centered from left to right in this. Now that actually sounds like it's something that I've heard before, but it's something that I had completely forgotten about. And your mileage may vary on that. I imagine it has to do with exactly how well the engine was centered when it was put in, and maybe the design of the engine mounts, and probably the design of your intake as well. So I moved my hood scoop back a little bit. I'm running an older Ford Motorsport or Ford Racing air cleaner. It's a 13-inch diameter air cleaner. So I found my hood stud here, and then I measured 6.5 inches back, and this back center stud should just clear. Although moving it back actually does cause a few other problems as well. So I'm going to pop the hood and I'm going to sort of show you what I'm talking about. Well, this could use a little bit of a cleaning, but you can see the air cleaner that I'm talking about, as well as the screw that I had to move to this stud. I converted this car from a 4-cylinder to a V8 in the year 2000. And at that time, I decided that I wanted to go with a carburetor. I am running a Lion Stealth intake and a 1-inch spacer, and then it's got a 600 CFM Holley vacuum secondary on it. This is a drop base. I believe it's a 3-inch drop base. So it might be, and I'm also running convertible motor mounts on this vehicle. So if you're looking at some intake swaps, those might be some helpful dimensions for you to keep in mind. When I moved that hood scoop back by 3 inches, you can see the one problem that I ran into, and that was this rear hole, which ordinarily would have been 3/4 of an inch forward, has actually come back here, and it's very, very close to this brace, this cross brace on the hood. And it's actually well under into this glue that holds the hood skin to the frame. But that's not really a big deal. We'll just trim that with a knife. All right, so I think it's time to test fit this and see if what I did actually worked. So it looks like everything is pretty close. The threads are just kind of catching on some of the holes. So I'm gonna go ahead and drill those holes just one size up. That's another advantage to using the step bit. You can easily increase the size by just a little bit each time. Well, that's it, and it looks like it fits pretty good. I'm gonna go ahead and put a little bit of paint on those bare edges left over from the drilling process. When you go to find hardware to put this on, the studs that come out of the bottom of the hood scoop are 1/4 20, and I would suggest using some kind of a locking nut if you don't have one already, and you might find that you need a washer as well. I hope this was useful for you. If you enjoyed this video, I would really appreciate it if you would give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. I have a bunch of projects coming up. The next one that I'm going to be doing is installing a new contour fan mount from Late Model Restoration on this vehicle.